keep yourself accountable. That's where the group environment is so important, because every man brings their 10%. And when every man brings their 10%, then we all can make 100% withdrawal from that energy. And I think we're seeing that more with hives and groups and tribes and people, conscious communities, things like that.
What does accountability look like? Like, let's make this practical, right?
Yeah.
And, whether you want to use an example or a hypothetical example, but like, what if I'm listening to this and, and this gets into some of the shadow work that you do, right? Maybe you can even define what the shadow is, but like, I remember, wanting to change the world, and then also, maybe around the age of 30, realizing that most of the reason I wanted to change the world was actually some sort of ego fulfillment about, power and prestige of like being somebody who's, some sort of status symbol. And so it's like, okay, in theory, I had one motivation, but underneath I had a different motivation, and I had to take accountability for that. Now it's like, there's a new part of the shadow that's revealed every week or every month, it would seem, that I'm becoming conscious of. Can you talk about that a little bit? How does one actually take accountability for, looking at the man in the mirror?
Yeah, I hear two big things there, the accountability piece and then the shadow piece. I'll start with the accountability piece. It takes a radical honesty, a self-ownership, an extreme ownership of what you say you're going to do and what you do. And that takes a lot of discipline and a lot of perseverance and a lot of grit. I think most people have really good intentions of what they want to do in the world, how they want to treat people. But it gets hard the day in, the day out. We have an acronym in our group called DARK, D-A-R-K, Do Daily Action Required King. Like, it takes to chop wood, carry water. And that's kind of lacking in our culture, because people have gotten comfortable. Things have gotten easy. You can pretty much get everything from your phone now. There's not a lot of go out and work ethic anymore. It's different. It's changed. I mean, if you're an entrepreneur, as you know, you'll stay up all night working on something because you're driven and you have a vision for what you want to bring to the world. One thing I learned early on in this quote unquote coaching space is not to sell accountability. So that's one really important distinction. I'm very clear with this with men up front. Like, I'm not here to like follow up with you like a nanny or a mom or anything. It's like, you got to do your work. Now, you're going to be in a container where that is the standard. That is the baseline. And if you don't conform to that standard or rise above that standard for any extended period of time, it's not a match anymore, right? Like, I work with men that are, entrepreneurs, leaders, high-level corporate men, people that are successful and are responsible for other people. And just that alone requires a certain standard of accountability. You can't be floundering, right? But if you are, you can entrain to kind of the pool of fish, right? But if you don't sustain that, then you'll fall away. So accountability is really a self-accountability and a way and a sort of a forum to keep yourself accountable. That's where the group environment is so important, because every man brings their 10%. And when every man brings their 10%, then we all can make 100% withdrawal from that energy. And I think we're seeing that more with hives and groups and tribes and people, conscious communities, things like that, where it is a more localized, focalized group of energy that is powerful. It's almost like little energy pods, and we're all like focused on a certain vision and mission. Mine happens to be Ignite the King. Yours happens to be Better Than Rich. And when that group, we have a thing called the bonfire. It's our thread that we have it on the daily. And sometimes you're the guy tending the fire and you're bringing all the energy to the group. And sometimes you're tired and weary and you just need to lay by the fire and get warm, right? But if everyone puts a log on and everyone stokes the fire, it's raging. Right. So you don't have to do it all alone, I guess, is the message. And that's a big part of the shadow, kind of to tie into that, because one of the biggest shadows men face is I'm alone, I'm not worthy, and I won't be loved. And I have to do it all by myself. It's one of the biggest pains men experience, is the lone wolf of like taking on the weight of the world, wearing the burden of their families, of their workplace, of the bigger world. I mean, however big you want to make it. And they wind up feeling just like stuck. and not realizing that there actually is a lot of support out there. But that is not something that has been taught in the culture for many generations, right? Just even the word emotion was like a dirty word 50 years ago, right? There wasn't even the concept of wellness wasn't even around till like the 1990s, right? Now wellness centers are, cannabis shops. So things just are new and they're still evolving, and just men being in an environment where we can talk about the ugly. We can talk about the things that I would never share that with anyone, or how might you judge me if I told you my deepest, darkest secrets and air my dirty laundry, and to realize again, love's not being withdrawn, but actually, and I know we've experienced this together in the sense of like, what makes you trustable? Wow, you sharing that makes me trust you more because now there's nothing to hide. It's all out there, right? And again, you have to be able to do that in an environment and a facilitation where it can really be held sacredly, because doing that kind of work haphazardly can lead to more harm than good, for sure.
Agreed. And so
Yeah.
it's really creating that space, right? Creating the safety for these, parts of ourselves that, we are ashamed of, that do feel guilty, that are, apathetic or angry or whatever is kind of at those lower, sort of frequencies of emotions, and
Yeah.
creating a safe space for them to be metabolized, and seen inside community.
Yeah.
And I've witnessed the power of that. I'm sure you have, and the men in your communities. So
The
this is
important point, just before we move on, is to say that it's not like a woe is me thing, but I think there's a denial and a suppression of a lot of that range of emotion and experience, where sometimes we focus so much on the win and the big thing that happens and the growth and all this stuff, but we don't touch into this part, which is not good or bad, right or wrong. It's just a frequency range of what is. So this allows, as you use the word metabolize, allows oneself to metabolize the energy that's built up, because ultimately the emotions and the emotional energy is the link between the spiritual and the physical, and that's how we transduce that through, is by actually metabolizing the emotion, the feeling. And the bottom line is there's things to feel. Like sometimes I'm pissed off, sometimes I'm angry, sometimes I'm melancholy, sometimes I'm joyful and excited, sometimes I'm giddy, so it's getting more of a bandwidth and a range. And that's really the goal, so to speak, not just to like wallow in my mother did this to me, my father did this to me, all of that, because
Sure.
who the hell wants to go there, right? But if it needs to be touched, it needs to be touched, and move on.
And I do believe that most men feel they're alone. I was able to grab breakfast with a friend recently, who's going through some challenges, and I was just like, I feel the exact same way. The only difference is I have, some friends to talk to it, talk about it with. And I think that
Mm-hmm.
there's so many times where we're isolated. And I think that's partially a cultural factor, but it's also kind of this idea of this stoic lone wolf,
Mm-hmm.
I have to do it myself, or I don't get, the credit for overcoming this.
Yeah.
And the truth is, no one's ever done really anything by themselves, right?
Right.
We're all standing on the shoulders of giants. And if we are able to humble ourselves, even briefly, to come, kind of have our, uh, be called to the carpet, so to speak, for what we're going through, and just be honest with people, I think you'd be surprised how common the challenges you are facing right now listening to this, how familiar they are to a lot of
Yeah.
other people. There's
Yeah.
uniqueness, don't get me wrong, but at the same time, there's a lot of similar veins that I see people
Yeah.
are facing. Would you agree with that?
Totally. There's like 10 things in there. I'm like, I want to like chop it at the
I
bit
know,
at, because
right?
beautiful, man. Great setup. Um, I'll start with the last thing first. That's why I focus so much on the archetypal energies. You mentioned Jung, and specifically for men, it's the lover, it's the warrior, it's the magician, and the king. And so much of who we are in our daily life, that commonality that you talk about, is our subconscious. And that is not unique. That is shared. That's the collective unconscious that Jung talks about, that we all share. That's why they're archetypes. An archetype is just a pattern, right? It's a pervasive pattern. So as men specifically, we all have challenges with our lover energy. We all have challenges with our warrior, our magician, and our king, and those have different energetics we can go over if you want. But the point is that, yes, our our work is similar. We have a phrase we use all the time in our group is your work is my work. And the beauty of being in a group and not being alone is that when a man does his work, he's doing that work not just for himself, but he's doing it for every man in that group. He's doing it really for all man and all mankind, right? And that work being done by that man makes it so I don't have to. I get to witness that and get the gift of that without going through the wound and the pain of that gift. That's really, again, to bring in like a tier 2 consciousness where it's like get the gift without the wound is huge. Like, I don't want to have to go through every shitty thing a man experiences, but if I can see and get the lesson from you, as you said, stand on the shoulders of giants, then good for me, right? Then I don't have to like have that pain, but I have my pain that I can transform that might be helpful for you. And the biggest illusion is to think that you're alone. And yes, you have to find your tribe, you have to find your people, but bringing it all the way down to the physiology, because I always like to look at like how is that actually happening in the body, is that when the nervous system goes into a state of stress and it's in that fight, flight, freeze, fawn response, you feel alone because in your fight, flight, everything's a tunnel vision. It's survival. It's just trying to like, where do I go so I don't die? Like that is the subconscious programming that's happening in that moment, or the expression of that programming. You can't see possibility. You can't see the bigger picture. That's more of a frontal lobe, higher cortical awareness. And when we're stressed, 40% of the blood flow and nerve activity goes away from the frontal lobe and activates the amygdala of the midbrain, which is all of our fight or flight. And unfortunately, in our culture, we're living in this sort of perpetual micro trauma field where we're in this fight or flight, whether it's the pressure of finances, the pressure of family, the pressure of success, the pressure of work, just again, what's going on in the world. That's a lot. Our nervous system really wasn't designed to handle stress in that way. It was handled to design stress where, you know, the tiger's running after you and you run away and then you shake it off and you have, okay, I'm okay, right? Big spikes of stress with mostly I'm okay. But now we live in this low-grade stress all the time, and it's deteriorating. So it perpetuates, I'm alone. And to bring it all the way back to the shadow, that's where the stories come in. Because we all have these unconscious stories we learned, right? And most of that was wired from the time we were, 0 to 7. I mean, 90% of how we express ourselves on a daily basis is the result of that first 7 years of hardwiring in the nervous system. So whatever happened to you from 0 to 7, that's your draw.
Yeah.
Now, what you do with it, that's what's malleable and changeable. You can't change what happened, but maybe you can. That's a whole other conversation. But,
yeah.
But that's what you have to work with. And the more you're able to be in community with that, then it has the possibility of real change.
Yeah. And my son,
I went off a little bit on the deep end there.
Oh no, you're good, man. That's definitely what this show is all about. I'm just thinking, our sons are about the same age. I don't know how old Wolfie is, but
7.
So Eli's 7 too. So it's like, all right, I gave him a good hand in some ways and a shitty hand in others, and let's deal with it, and start to unwind and see what sort of traumas I've already caused in my son. It'll be it's an interesting way to parent. To be honest, to go back,
but
and
at least
look
we
at
have
that.
the awareness of that, right?
Sure.
Think of how much to use kind of all the catchphrases. Another thing is it ran in my family till it ran into me. Each generation of men is like an evolutionary baton race. And you're going to bring that baton as far forward as you can in your life for your son. And you're going to pass to him and say, this is what I've learned since I got the baton from my father. And now you're going to take it and run. And, the way information doubles every 10 years now, like these kids today are just like blowing me away what they can do and words they're using and awareness is. And part of it I realize is because that's how we talk in front of him. That's the emotional energy, sacred union that I have with my wife that we're consciously parenting and pouring into him, and we're like surprised when we see it. Like, well, of course, because we've done a lot of that work. Again, coming back to the original comment of like, do your own work. How you speak to your child becomes their inner voice later. The modeling that's happening at 7, 8, 9 years old, it's incredible. And yes, it's my mission in my life. My calling is to pour into that child because that's my legacy. Whatever I do with Ignite or any other creation, it's that child bringing that evolutionary baton forward one more step.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's so many different things I want to chat with you on. And also, I want to give the listener something really practical,
Yeah.
And maybe define, if we were to go into these archetypes, could you define these a little bit more? And even using terms like collective unconscious, the shadow, these four archetypes help, kind of help the listener kind of understand what these are and why they might be useful to have a framework or a mental map for as they go through their day-to-day lives. What would you say to that?
Yeah, great question. In Ignite, we have two maps that form the framework of the sort of the journey we take men on. And that's the four archetypes that we'll talk about. And the hero's journey, Joseph Campbell. And the archetypes really form over the hero's journey. And the reason we use that and the reason it's important because the hero's journey is the monomyth. The one myth that transcends every culture throughout time, that every man, every hero, every story, every movie you've ever watched that you've loved has followed the hero's journey. And it's this story of the hero going on an adventure and knowing he's really determined for more. He refuses that call and then ultimately pushes himself over the threshold to say, I'm going to go for it, whatever it is. And whatever I have to face, whatever I have to be with, whatever I have to learn, whatever mentors, adversaries that I meet along the way, that's the journey, right? That's where I get forged in the fire to ultimately face the deepest internal battle of my life, to come out the other side with this gift, this torch, so to speak, to bring back home. And on that way home, have to face the ultimate battle of life, the live or die battle, to bring that elixir home to my community, to make it better, to then set off on another adventure. And that's the cycle from Star Wars to Harry Potter to Rocky, you name it. Every story is this story of going off and this call to adventure. So how that relates to the archetypes is, as a man, there's a lot of archetypes, but these four core archetypes of lover, warrior, magician, king, I'm a man, you're a man. Things have to be simple. Like, it can't be more than 3 or 4 things, right? If I can master these 4 things and get to know how they show up in my life specifically, because there is the egoic part, there is our personality, and each of these archetypes they have a uniqueness to them. But there are generalizations, and that's what we'll talk about. So our lover, it's our most primal energy. It's our life force. It's our emotions. It's what we're born with, right? When we're born in this world, we are born as pure love, an expression of love. When that child comes in, this release of oxytocin and this love hormone, and, it's like this most beautiful experience you've ever had in your life, because there's like nothing wrong with this thing. It's like absolutely beautiful. And that's our purest expression of love. And unfortunately, in our culture, love means sex. Love means eroticism and all the shadows, pornography, all the things that go with that, all the distorted ways that love will show up. Marketing loves this, right? Just using sex as a way to sell things, using the most primal responses in man. So a man must get to know his lover energy. And unfortunately, we're just not shown that in a very honoring and reverent way. Most men that I mentor and speak to, their fathers never had the talk with them, the birds and the bees, right? We've learned from our friends. We've learned from the culture. And nowadays with technology, it's crazy what kids are exposed to and what's being taught in schools. It's just really out of control, right? So this distortion in lover energy, or what we call the shadow lover, leads to addiction, right? It leads to drug abuse, alcoholism, pornography, social media addiction. These are like the addicted lover energies. The shadow is essentially the distorted way that it will show up in your life. The behaviors, the actual like bad behaviors that show up in your life that express itself through these archetypes. So the lover, it's all the addictive, or it's the one that's checked out. It's the other end. So each shadow has a positive and a negative pole. The positive is like the addicted, where it's like charged. It has energy like a battery. And the negative pole is like this very flat, meh, energy neutral, energy poor kind of state, right? So each of the archetypes has these positive and negative poles, right? And in the warrior, go ahead.
Can I ask you a question on that? Because I think that